All right, so now that we've covered the causes of the war, let's talk about what happened during the war. So, Germany wanted to take out France quickly. They did not want to have to fight on two fronts. As anybody can understand, as being surrounded is not a battle easily won. So, they move all their forces to attack in the west, believing that Russia would be slower and clumsier to get ready. And they were partly right. So they needed a quick way to get into France to take out them before trying to fight the giant Russia. And along the border of France and Germany, we have a string of forts. France was well defended along their border, especially since the 1870 Franco-Prussian War. So their way in was through Belgium. They invaded Belgium just to move their hundreds of thousands of troops into the northeastern border of France. And now this is when the UK joined the war. They saw Belgium as a neutral nation, had nothing to do with the conflict, and seeing Germany just invade them, they said it was the final straw, and they declared war on Germany. But the German army was underway. They moved through Belgium after some pretty stiff resistance from the Belgians and made it pretty far until they were stopped at the Battle of the Marne. Here you can see east of Paris. And after they were stopped there, both armies started moving north, maybe to try and go around each other. And as they moved, they would dig trenches. They would dig trenches as they moved to kind of defend their flanks. And they dug trenches and they raced all the way up to the sea. And by the end of it, you see that they would have this line of trenches going from Switzerland all the way to the North Sea. And the lines of battle would not change very much for the next several years. They were put into what we call a stalemate, where neither side could gain an advantage. And the problem is that in this war, the advantage lay with the defenders. The technology of machine guns and accurate rifles had made things like the bayonet charges, or especially cavalry charges, ineffective. And you can see in the beginning of the war, they would use cavalry charges, but that quickly went away when they realized that they made large targets for the machine gunners. So what was the fighting like along the Western Front? Well, in order to try and make it to the other side of no man's land, in between the trenches, to get to the enemy, one side would start with a long artillery barrage that could last hours or even days to try and hit the trenches and break them up enough to allow them to go through the trenches, which are to allow the infantry to have a chance to get to the other side. And it also broke up the barbed wire. So after a long artillery barrage, then infantry would try to make the distance sprinting across no man's land as you were shot at from the other side. And sometimes they would make it and they would take that trench but then reinforcements would come from another side and they would take back the trench. And it went like that for the several years. And that's why we say it was a stalemate. No side could really make any tangible gains. So, how does the U.S. enter into the war? Well, the U.S. was neutral and wanted to stay neutral for the most part. They didn't want to take part in these disastrous wars of Europe that it was so constantly having, right? So it at first chose to be neutral, but there were two main things that kind of brought them into war. One, that Germany was using unrestricted submarine warfare, which is that even passenger liners or civilians heading from America to England would be sunk under suspect that they were carrying supplies. And the thing is that Germany needed to stop Britain from getting its supplies from its colonies. Britain still had a major world empire at this time, but its colonies were very far away and had to get to them by sea. So Germany thought that it could break Britain by cutting off its supplies. So there was that. But what really pushed them over the edge was when there was a telegraph intercepted that was going from Germany to Mexico, trying to form an alliance with Mexico to attack the United States. And the U.S., which had recently sent troops into Mexico to stop Mexicans from raiding border towns in the U.S., was outraged. So Woodrow Wilson went to Congress and asked them to declare war upon hearing this message, and told them something of the like that here is an enemy that clearly wants to destroy us, and we need to do everything we can to stop them. And Congress agreed. So the U.S. declared war in 1917, I believe. So, what did all of this pressure and the long war do to these countries? Well, it put a lot of strain on them. You have to pay a lot of money for food for your soldiers. And this leaves less supplies for the civilians. So it was only a matter of time that one country was going to crack under the pressure of trying to support these huge armies of hundreds of thousands of men, right? And that one was Russia. It was the first one to fall. There were more casualties on the Eastern Front, and there weren't as many trench warfare, but there was a more vicious fighting, you could say. So Russia collapsed under the strain of not being able to feed its population and support the army at the same time. The people in Moscow revolt. The Tsar Nicholas, the Emperor of Russia, was overthrown. And Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Communist Party, comes to power, promising to promote equality among the people. And he quickly wants to focus on creating a communist state in Russia, converting the whole state to communism. So he quickly wants to sue for peace from Germany. They lose some land from Germany, or to Germany from Russia, and but we're able to get peace with Germany, a peace that the Germans were very happy about as well. and were pulled out of the war. So Germany now had exactly what it wanted and took all of its forces from the east and moved them west to reinforce and try to knock out the French army before U.S. Forces could strengthen them. So the spring offensive of 1918, you see Germany getting as close as it ever had to Paris. And that is here where you have the Battle of Chateau-Thierry and Belleau Wood. They were within 40 miles of the city. That's something like an hour drive or 40 minutes drive, depending on how fast you are going. We're talking about what would be the equivalent, maybe talking about from here to Antigua. So the forces had made it that close to the capital. It had almost won the war, you could say. But by that time, the U.S. had already started reinforcing Paris, and they were able to hold them back. And as you can see, Chateau-Thierry and Belleau Wood were both victories for the Allies. So after that, the Americans run their own offensive over here in the Argonne Forest, where they break through the German defenses, shatter the German lines. And now the pressure on the country of Germany was too much. Remember, all of these 5 nations were under a lot of strain supporting these large armies. And with this loss, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, you could say. It was the last straw. Berlin then went into riots and revolts, and the Kaiser, the emperor of the German Empire, was forced to surrender. And that's the story of World War I.